Today on Music Meanderings, we're going to take a look at rock band Kiss and their 1970s output. Now, they put out lots of great studio albums, also solo albums, and a couple live albums. I'm going to include all those in this ranking of the top albums from the 70s by rock band Kiss. And go ahead and comment below and give me your ranking as well. 13 albums, counting the 4 solo albums and the 2 live albums. They released 2 albums in 1974 alone. That's back when bands would release 2 albums in 1 year. That doesn't happen very often these days. We're going to dive right in. And at number 13, least favorite has got to be the Peter Criss solo album. Now, I realize these guys were doing different things on their solo albums. It gave them a chance to kind of break free and break out of the good old Kiss grind that they were used to doing. But I just did not care a whole lot for the Peter Criss solo album. Didn't find a whole lot to love on that record. Next, at number 12, would be the Gene Simmons solo album. A little better than the Peter Criss record. Of course, he really branched out and even sung a version of When You Wish Upon a Star, which you wouldn't expect Gene Simmons to be doing. Number 11, well, we might as well get all the solo albums in there. Paul Stanley. Little better than Gene Simmons. Some memorable tracks on the Paul Stanley record. In fact, I have friends that would rank the Paul Stanley solo record as the best Kiss solo record. I'm not one of those people. I've got it down at number 11. Number 10, a much better album than I at first thought, and it has grown on me over the years. And talking about Dynasty, the Dynasty album from Kiss, their last studio album of the 70s, came out in 1979. I love the cover. I think the cover is very cool, even though, as we learned in later years, it might be a little misrepresentative because Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons are the only 2 members that actually played on most of that record. Very little contribution from Peter Criss and Ace Frehley. I Was Made for Loving You, kind of a polarizing Kiss song. You either love it or hate it. Gene Simmons doesn't like it, but he understands that they need to play it every time they play out, so he loves it for the reaction it gets from the crowd. 2000 Man. I love Ace Frehley's take on that Rolling Stones song. Sure Knows Something. Dirty Livin', probably one of my least favorite tracks on the album. Then you got the Gene Simmons track, Charisma, A Magic Touch, Hard Times, X-Ray Eyes, and Ace Frehley with a good track to wrap it up, Save Your Love. Kiss Dynasty, 1979, not as bad as I once thought it was. It has really grown on me, and I've got it on my list at number 10. Dress to Kill, after their first 2 albums released in 1974, Dress to Kill followed in 1975. And it does have some standout tracks, of course, that I learned from Kiss Alive, was the first I heard songs like Rock Bottom, Come On and Love Me, She, and of course the live version of Rock and Roll All Night, Party Every Day, did a lot better than the studio version that was released off of this record. But outside of those songs, and I know this is Kiss, right? We're not talking Rush. We're talking people that write songs like Meet Me in the Ladies' Room. But still pretty juvenile lyrics on this one. I can't get past that. Songs like Room Service, Two Timer, Ladies in Waiting. Yeah, probably my least favorite of the first 3 Kiss records. And just in case you were wondering, since I only covered 3 of the Kiss solo albums, I got Ace Frehley in at number 8. What a strong, strong album. Most, but not all, would agree that it is the best of the Kiss solo albums, with tracks like Rip It Out, Speeding Back to My Baby, New York Groove. I believe the only track from the 4 solo albums that Kiss would regularly include in their set list when they'd go out and tour as Kiss. looking at Kiss in their 70s output, including their solo albums, since they did have the Kiss logo up in the upper left hand of each solo album. I count them as Kiss records, and also have to include the 2 Kiss Live albums, Kiss Alive, Kiss Alive 2. And we are down to number 7 in my rankings, and that is their second album, Hotter Than Hell. Of course, this album just gets run over the coals for being badly produced, and it is kind of muddy. It is not a great produced record, although there are some pretty good remastered versions of it available. It had Got to Choose on it, Parasite, the title track, also Let Me Go, Rock and Roll, and some great Ace Frehley solos on the track Strange Ways. Hotter Than Hell from Kiss, in at number 7. And number 6, Alive 2. Alive 2, just a great live album. Didn't quite measure up to the first Alive, of course. How could it? That was such an outstanding album. But I did appreciate the fact that Alive 2 didn't copy songs that were on the first Alive set, although they only had enough for 3 live sides. So the fourth side, they had to put new studio tracks on, which were pretty good. I think the best on that is probably Ace Frehley's contribution to that and Rocket Ride, but some pretty good stuff on side 4, the studio side of Alive 2. And we're into the top 5 now, ranking the Kiss 70s output. And I have Destroyer. Now, you might rank that as 1. Let me know. Again, comment down below what your rankings are of the Kiss 70s albums. But Destroyer, a great album. In fact, I've got a copy of it, Destroyer Resurrected, which they remixed. And I don't know which version I prefer, the remix or the original. Probably the original, but the remix is pretty good too. Brings up the drums and some other elements in the mix. In fact, for God of Thunder, that really brings up those sped up kids' voices in the background, and really a pretty solid answer to the fans back in the day after the first Kiss Alive album, wondering, my goodness, how are these guys going to come back and top Kiss Alive? And I don't know that they ever topped Kiss Alive, but Destroyer was a strong album with the lead-off track Detroit Rock City, King of the Nighttime World, God of Thunder, perhaps the most cringe-worthy of all Kiss songs, in my opinion, Great Expectations. Flaming Youth, good track, Sweet Pain, of course the hits Shout It Out Loud and Beth, Do You Love Me? And the little bit at the end, the crowd noise that's called Rock and Roll Party. So Destroyer, number 5 on my top 70s Kiss albums. Well, this one could have ranked higher, but I've got it in at number 4, and that is Love Gun. I originally had it on cassette, wore that cassette out. Haven't replaced it on vinyl yet, but just a great album, Love Gun by Kiss. I Stole Your Love, Christine 16, which these days, when that's sung by Gene Simmons, that's kind of cringy, isn't it? Also, Shock Me, the first big Ace Frehley song. Love Gun, the title track. Don't really understand why they put a cover version of the Crystals' Then She Kissed Me to close off the album. It just really didn't fit the rest of the record. But Kiss, being the marketing geniuses that they are, always had goodies in their albums. And do you still have a copy of the Love Gun album with the actual Love Gun cutout? And we are into the top 3, my top 3 Kiss albums. Again, your results may vary. I'm sure they probably do. Go ahead and list it in the comments. What do you think are the best Kiss albums out of the 70s? I've got number 3, Rock and Roll Over. Rock and Roll Over, one of my favorite Kiss studio albums. 5th studio album by them, released in 1976. With the tracks I Want You, of course, the hit Calling Dr. Love. Mr. Speed, there's actually a Kiss tribute band, very good Kiss tribute band that uses that name. Hard Luck Woman, interesting story with that one. Paul Stanley actually wrote that for Rod Stewart, who refused the song. So Paul Stanley handed it off to Peter Criss, and they had a pretty big hit with that. But Rock and Roll Over, I've got it as my number 3 Kiss album from the 70s. And just 2 left as we count down the 13 albums released in the 70s by Kiss. Now, I'm including the 4 solo records since they actually had the Kiss logo on them, and also the 2 live albums. They're just so iconic, I had to throw them on the list. I'm not including any greatest hits compilations, though, that were released in the 70s. Well, we're up to number 2, and it is the first Kiss album, just self-titled, Kiss, released in 1974. You took a look at this picture, and you just wondered, who are these guys? What's the story? Well, the story was they were into glam rock and very influenced by bands like the New York Dolls, and Kiss thought they'd do that, only more extreme. And Kiss, the first record, really got people's attention. Didn't sell real well when it first came out, but really a very strong record that is just full of songs that would be played for their entire career during their live set, like Strutter, Nothing to Lose, Firehouse, Cold Gin, also Deuce, Black Diamond, 10,000 Years. Again, another one of those questionable decisions. They had a song, Kissin' Time, on there. Not on all copies, but on some pressings, they put Kissin' Time on there because that was in relation to a radio contest they were doing, where the winners got to kiss members of Kiss.
Oh, if you have any problems, dial information. Thank you for calling.
And you probably know what's left. It's got to be number 1 on my list. Talking Kiss Alive. Kiss Alive. When I was growing up, this album just really got your attention. The first live Kiss record. Everybody had it. Everybody was talking about it. And of course, the band just blew up after this. Their first 3 studio records were okay. They got people's attention. In fact, this was kind of a make it or break it record because the record label was about ready to release them. And they made a pretty brave decision in releasing a live record after their first 3 studio records hadn't done all that good. But of course, it turned out to be a genius move. Kiss Alive, that is my number 1 Kiss record of the 70s. Just recapping real quick, and at number 13, I have the Peter Criss solo record, followed closely by Gene Simmons' solo record at 12, and Paul Stanley, his solo record at 11. Number 10 on my list is Dynasty. 9 was Dressed to Kill. Ace Frehley and his solo record, my favorite of the 4 solo albums, made it all the way up to 8 on my list. Number 7 is their second album, Hotter Than Hell. Number 6 is their second live set in the 70s, Alive 2. Destroyer, I had at number 5. Love Gun, number 4. Rock and Roll Over, very strong Kiss record at 3. The first Kiss album got my number 2 ranking, and in at number 1 on Kiss albums released in the 70s, Kiss Alive. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment below and subscribe to Music Meanderings.